Welcome to my channel, Midsummer Myths, where you find stories like no other, packed with twists, drama, and unbelievable moments you won't forget. Now, imagine this. You're a decorated US Army veteran. You walk into a bank you've been using for years, expecting nothing more than a quick deposit. Instead, the teller looks at you with that smug, holier-than-thou smirk, and then, right in front of a line of customers, rips your check in half like it's some kind of cheap paper receipt. That's what happened to Jim, and it was the spark that would turn an ordinary Tuesday morning into a scene out of a Hollywood thriller. Jim was the kind of guy who blended into a crowd. Short-cropped silver hair, pressed shirt, calm smile. You'd never guess this was the same man who had led a platoon through 2 combat zones. He'd been with this bank for over a decade. His record was spotless. But today, he wasn't just making any deposit. This check, drawn from a military pension fund, wasn't just money. It was his lifeline for the month, tied directly to years of service and sacrifice. When he handed it over, the teller, a younger woman named Claire, gave him a once-over like she was scanning for something to judge. Then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "We don't cash fake checks here." Jim blinked. Fake. He barely had time to respond before she took the check in both hands and with a sharp tearing sound, split it down the middle. Gasps rippled through the bank. Jim's heart pounded, not with fear, but with that cold, controlled kind of anger that comes from years of discipline. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just stood there, looking her in the eyes, while the pieces of his pension check fluttered onto the counter. That's when she smirked, as if she'd just proven some point. But Jim had learned long ago that the most powerful moves are made quietly. And right now, he was already planning the next step, a move that would turn this smug little power trip into a moment Claire would never forget. Because what Claire didn't know was that Jim had more connections than she could imagine, and some of them wore badges. The bank's atmosphere had shifted. You could feel it in the way people whispered, in the way the manager avoided eye contact with Jim. Claire, meanwhile, was still riding her little wave of authority, her tone dripping with self-importance as she told the next customer, next in line. Jim stepped aside, his mind working like clockwork. He didn't storm out. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The voice on the other end was steady, official. "This is special. Agent Walker, FBI Field Office." "Walker," Jim said calmly. "It's Sergeant Major Jim Porter. I think I've got a situation here you'll want eyes on. I'm at First Colonial Bank, downtown branch. My military pension check was just destroyed in front of me. I suspect federal law violations." There was a pause. Then Walker's voice sharpened. "Stay put. We'll be there in 10. While he waited, Jim took note of everything. The teller's name badge, the exact time on the wall clock, the witnesses in line. Years of military training had taught him that documentation was as important as action. Claire noticed him still standing there. "Sir, if you're not conducting business, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Jim didn't move. "I'm conducting business," he said quietly. 9 minutes later, the glass doors swung open. 2 men in suits walked in, their presence instantly changing the air in the room. They carried themselves with the same quiet authority Jim once had on patrol. The taller one stepped forward, flashing a badge. "FBI, we need to speak with your branch manager immediately." The color drained from Claire's face. The manager stumbled over words, trying to figure out what was happening. Jim stayed silent, watching her squirm. What followed was a whirlwind. Agents asking for security footage, taking statements from witnesses, and requesting Claire's step into a side office. By the time the agents were done, the entire bank knew. Something serious was unfolding. Claire was no longer smirking. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain herself. But every word only seemed to tighten the noose. Jim just stood there, knowing the real chaos hadn't even started yet. The agents didn't leave immediately. Instead, they combed through transaction logs, compared signatures, and interviewed customers. Claire's voice carried from the back office, growing more desperate by the minute. One agent returned to the lobby where Jim stood. "Sergeant Major, do you still have the deposit slip copy?" Jim nodded and handed it over. The agent glanced at it, then at Jim. "You realize what she did is a violation of multiple federal statutes." "Oh," Jim said dryly, "I realize. It wasn't just about a torn check. Destroying a government-issued pension payment wasn't some petty mistake. It was destruction of federal property, possible interference with a veteran's benefits, and, depending on the agent's findings, it could even touch on fraud." The manager tried to smooth things over. "Mr. Porter, perhaps we can just reissue." Jim cut him off. "You're not going to fix this with a reissue. She humiliated me in public. She accused me of fraud in front of witnesses. This isn't about money anymore." The FBI agent gave Jim a look, the kind of look that said we're on the same page. Within half an hour, the local police had been called in for coordination. Claire emerged from the office looking pale, escorted by 2 officers. As they walked her past, the customers' whispers rose like a wave. Phones came out. Cameras clicked. Claire kept her eyes down, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Jim didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just knew that by the time this story finished, she'd be thinking twice before tearing up anything again. But there was still one more move Jim had planned. One that would make sure this incident wasn't just an embarrassing day for Claire, but a career-ending one. Jim left the bank that afternoon without his deposit, but with something far more valuable: the official case number and a direct line to the investigating agent. The next morning he made another call, this time to the regional director of the bank's corporate office. The conversation was short, sharp, and delivered with the kind of calm precision only a career soldier could muster. By noon, Claire's name was on an internal suspension list. Corporate compliance was scrambling, and the local news, tipped off by an anonymous source, was running a story about a bank teller accused of destroying a veteran's pension check. Jim didn't ask for fame. He didn't even put his name in the article. But the story spread fast, shared across social media with hashtags like #VeteranJustice and #BankFail. The fallout was brutal. Customers closed accounts. Community leaders voiced outrage. The bank's PR department went into overdrive. By the end of the week, Claire was officially terminated, and thanks to the FBI's involvement, she was also facing possible federal charges. Jim's deposit reissued in full. But when the bank offered him a public apology, he declined. He didn't want their PR stunt. He wanted them to remember, and they would. Months later, Jim walked past that same bank branch. It was quieter now, new faces behind the counters. The manager who had once looked the other way was gone, replaced by someone who greeted customers like they mattered. Jim stepped in, not for business, but to shake the hand of the new manager. "Just making sure things have changed," he said. They had. Claire, on the other hand, hadn't found new work in the financial sector. Word of The FBI incident followed her everywhere. Jim had never needed to raise his voice, never needed to cause a scene. He'd simply let the truth and the law do the heavy lifting. It was poetic, in a way. The same quiet discipline that had kept him alive overseas had served him here at home. How did you like this story? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories from Midsummer Myths.